When we think of opera and laughter, the great comic operas that Mozart wrote in collaboration with his librettist Lorenzo da Ponte quickly spring to mind. In Così fan tutte, Don Giovanni, and above all in The Marriage of Figaro, Mozart and da Ponte fashioned characters whose qualities and foibles both create and emerge from situations of exquisite comedy. These paragons of opera buffa combine razor-sharp wit and acute observation on 18th century social and sexual politics with an invitation to understand human weakness rather than to condemn it. They have kept audiences laughing for more than 200 years. But a side effect of their longevity has been their transformation from singular spectacles into beloved texts to be recited again and again. Our familiarity with The Marriage of Figaro might have deepened our appreciation of Mozart's empathy and psychological acumen, not to mention his beautiful music, but it often seems to have cooled our comic delight at the scrapes that Cherubino and company get into. Rather than responding with a belly laugh, these days audiences are apt to chuckle inwardly or merely to smile nostalgically. Dramaturgs and directors have sought to inject fresh life and reveal new insights into Mozart's operatic classics by updating or recontextualizing them for modern audiences. Our approach this afternoon, however, takes a different tack. We hope to excavate the 18th century sources of the laughter that arises from opera buffa. These sources can be located not in the salubrious surroundings of the opera house, but in the rough and ready street theatre idiom of Commedia dell'arte, from which da Ponte and Mozart compiled their cast of characters. The clever servant girl, the put-upon drudge, the windbag, the sleazy playboy, the love-struck youth, the resourceful outlaw. All these archetypes are rooted in the improvisatory traditions of itinerant Commedia dell'arte troupes, whose slapstick routines had entertained outdoor audiences throughout Europe since the 16th century. Although Commedia dell'arte was in decline by the second half of the 18th century, partly owing to the rise of written-out comedies by playwrights and librettists such as Carlo Goldoni, Mozart showed his enthusiasm for the genre during the Viennese Carnival season of 1783, that is, 3 years before he composed The Marriage of Figaro. In a letter, Mozart asked his father to send his Harlequin costume from Salzburg to Vienna so that he could wear it to public balls during the carnival season. And there's sorry, I'm having a slight technical hitch with my slide. I wanted just to quote the letter where he's asking his father Leopold to send him the Harlequin costume, but it has to be a secret. Mozart's very secretive about this. He wants to surprise his friends and the Viennese public with his appearance as Harlequin. And this tone of secrecy and intrigue is worthy of a Commedia dell'arte plot itself. And indeed, it turned out that Mozart's musical and dramatic instincts were not satisfied with mere dancing and carousing. He wanted nothing less than to write, compose, and star in a Commedia dell'arte production. He informed his father of his hush-hush plan to put together a company of masqueraders and perform a little pantomime. Less than a month later, this pantomime was staged during the intermission of a masked ball, and Mozart proudly told his father that he and his friends and relatives had played it with real charm. Now, I've got the slide working now, so hopefully you can see. This is the first letter to the father, asking for the costume. And these statues are actually French, not Viennese, but they convey something of the 18th century style of Commedia dell'arte characters. And these are two of his brother-in-law and sister-in-law who played in the pantomime alongside him. We'll hear a little about them later. But how did this pantomime unfold, and what did its music sound like? Unfortunately, we have precious little idea. Although Mozart composed the music for string quartet, only the first violin part survives. Similarly, the libretto, written by Johann Heinrich Friedrich Müller and roundly disparaged by Mozart, is now lost. All that remains is a series of laconic, discontinuous stage directions in the violin part, similar in form and function to the shorthand notes that Commedia dell'arte troupes would pin up backstage as aide-memoire for their comic routines, or lazzi. And we've reproduced the entirety of this text in the handout that hopefully you have a copy of, so you can see what we're working with. In its current condition, then, the musical and dramatic materials that survive cannot be approached as a recipe for performance in general, but rather as remnants left over from a singular and unrepeatable occasion. And while this is in one sense a great shame, it also offers a great opportunity, as our group of musicians and actors has found. Adopting the improvisatory spirit of Commedia dell'arte tradition, we have devised a version of the pantomime that aims to capture something of the vivid, bawdy nature of Commedia dell'arte as experienced in Mozart's world, and we'll perform it for you in a moment. First, just a few words about the style and substance of what you will see and hear. From a musical perspective, the surviving violin part is jaunty and popular in tone. So, in collaboratively devising and improvising the missing parts, our musicians have accordingly placed a premium on enthusiasm and raucous vitality over salon-style sophistication and polish. Rather than writing out all the missing parts, we've arrived at certain basic decisions involving affect, texture, harmony, and ensemble, and we'll leave the rest to the spur of the moment. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have about our methods after the performance. Likewise, the dramatic scenario that has emerged under Majel Connery's direction is based on the fragmentary synopsis reproduced in your handout, but it makes the necessary leaps of faith and imagination over the yawning gaps that remain. In exploring this neglected corner of Mozart's music for stage, we are thus not aiming for historical verisimilitude, but rather for a sense of the rawness and excitement that must have attended the performance of all of Mozart's music when it was new and unfamiliar. To this end, we take certain liberties that Mozart himself took, the rearrangement of works by other composers, for example, or the quotation of familiar excerpts from other works. But in the final analysis, we are not overly concerned with fidelity to Mozart, or at least not in his guise as great composer. We're more interested in Mozart as Harlequin, the character who extricates himself from sticky situations through agility, ingenuity, or sheer audacity, in short, through improvisation. The masks of the Commedia dell'arte characters do not hide the individual, but rather make visible elements within him or her that would otherwise not be seen. In other words, when Mozart played Harlequin in 1783, Harlequin also played Mozart. Each shaped the other. And in this, Mozart was no different from countless other Viennese revelers who enjoyed bending the rules that governed identity, behavior, and the distinction between performance and real life during the Carnival season. To return finally to the theme of our own festivities, if laughter emerges from this pantomime, it is not always the gentle humour of Figaro. In the Commedia dell'arte idiom, laughter can be malicious, conspiratorial, or xenophobic, as is suggested by Mozart's unexplained introduction of a Turk, otherwise known as the bogeyman of Vienna's cultural imagination, then as now. But there are also moments of warm-hearted poignancy. While our antics may seem far removed from Figaro's sophistication and complexity, it is our hope that performing the pantomime might shed light on comic aspects of opera buffa that are so familiar they've become almost imperceptible. And Martha Feldman and David Levin will pursue these themes in relation to Figaro and other operas after our performance. So, in anticipation of their arrival, we had better make our final preparations.
materials from an improvised comedy, recreating something that Mozart and his contemporaries made. And far from being life staged within a play, this was a play within real life, done for fun and laughs. And what we usually think about when we think about past performances is the life stage within a play, because that's what we know. We think we have some text there. Remember that Mozart was prompted to do this by Carnival time. Carnival time was a time when time was out of joint, and when laughter was of the time. I got interested in Carnival because it was synonymous with theater, and especially opera theater in the 18th century, and I've been writing about that. There are lots of hilarious images of the castrati that I've been writing about lately being parodied during Carnival. And I think we're going to see slides of a few if they come on or when they do. Give me a cue. So within that context, imagine masking and hijinks are just part of the calendar year, a bracketed part of the calendar year. The disguise of masks caused confusion through concealment, false identities, misrecognition. There's lots and lots of writing about this. By assuming new identities, the usual boundaries put people in their proper places by class, gender, station, and age. Under normal circumstances, were upended. Topsy-turvy world, everything up for grabs. And he'll take that phenomenon and mix it with the growing passion over the course of the 18th century with Italian musical comedy in the form of opera, or what was called opera buffa, comic opera. It hit its peak, really, during Mozart's time in Vienna and that of his contemporaries. And it was a time when his favorite librettist, Lorenzo da Ponte, was in Vienna. Between 1786 and 1790, they wrote these three incredibly famous, hilarious, and quite profound comedies, Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così fan tutte. The marriage of Figaro is the one we'll concentrate on, and I think maybe has the most direct parallels with what we've just seen, but they all depended on reworking quirky plots and nutty characters from the improvised Commedia dell'arte tradition. When it was transformed to indoor opera, of course, the street characters became less raw, less physical, less exaggerated than, in some ways than their originals, more refined and moralized, but not completely. There was a lot of sort of the subversive street stuff that was in there. And the real payoff was this very precise and refined elaboration of the poetic and musical elements, which resulted in what we think of as full-scale, fully authored opera. Whether it's fully authored is something we could talk about during the Q&A. So these characters, the ones who people these operas, continue to use disguise and misrecognition to upset the expectations, especially about the character's place in society. Think about it. Don Giovanni, most of you probably know. Donna Elvira is very much that kind of character, sliding between class. She's always donna, she's always a lady, but she's so angry with the Don for abandoning her, and at the same time still in love with him, that she does crazy things and compromises her status as a lady. She masks herself along with two fellow nobles that presumably has a noble cause to go and unmask the Don. But he can use masking too, and he's a slippery character. He has his masked servant dance with the fiancée of the pretty maid Zerlina so that he can abduct her unobserved. Doesn't quite work out, but in another scene, Elvira falls for the Don's trick of switching masks with his servant while serenading her so he can steal off with her maid. And again, she compromises the dignity that's expected of her class. So we should think about these, have them in mind. This slithering between classes, which for the Don is in order to rack up conquests, and we sort of saw a certain racking up, tallying of conquests even here. So we laugh at Don Giovanni, even though it's a dark comedy, and even though we're also kind of aching at others' miseries or incensed by them or what have you. So the question for us is, how do music and specifically opera make us laugh? Well, Mozart brings things out of our nervous systems, our psyches, our senses, and our sympathies, but puts them into full play that wouldn't be possible without music. That's a point we want to make. We're going to watch a short scene from Figaro to see how operatic music does this. In the action before this scene, the young, love-struck page, Cherubino, confides to Susanna that he's in love with all women. I'm sure you know this, including the countess, the mistress of the household. So this is the famous aria, non so più, cosa sono, cosa faccio, etc. We're not going to see that. This is the background. After he stops, the two hear the count arrive. Susanna is terrified. She hides Cherubino behind a chair. The count enters the room making amorous proposals, sound familiar? Making amorous proposals to Susanna, a la Dottore in a way. When they hear the voice of the unctuous music master Basilio, he's one of these in-between characters. He's certainly a middle-class character, and he's unctuous. Now, the count at this point goes to hide behind the chair, but of course Cherubino's hiding there. So Cherubino, being a nimble young adolescent, jumps up on the front of the chair and is covered by a dress, with a dress by Susanna. This oily Basilio then starts gossiping maliciously about Cherubino's love for the countess. And the count puts up with a lot of horrible, nasty kind of gossip until that happens. And at that point, he rises up out of hiding and demands an explanation. And then the trio that we're going to see begins. And it kind of begins in midstream. It's very much sort of in medias res, like things were already happening, and all of a sudden we're in an ensemble.
First of all, just about the achievement, right? I hope it's clear to you that we have a violin line and some vague suggestions, as Roger suggested at the outset, penned into that violin line. And what we get is a fully realized performance, a performance, that is to say, which is thanks to the inspiration of Major Connery as stage director and Roger Moseley as music director of this group, whose work in the improvisational practices of historical performance practices, I think, is at once extraordinary and modest. It's not as if it seems to me it trumpets the nature of the occasion, but the nature of improvisational intelligence is worth noting. So it's hard to follow up on that, if only in part because it's, I think, wonderfully inventive and imaginative. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about pantomime, and then perhaps we could talk a bit about pantomime, opera buffa, and laughter. Pantomime has a very long history dating back to before the Common Era, but its relation to opera buffa is something that's of particular importance given the relation to Mozart that we're proposing today. And in this case, it seems important to note that pantomime plays with these set characters, and those set characters remain in dialogue with contemporary events, with the particular venue at stake. So in this case, if we have a set of characters who play like a doctor or a slimy aristocrat, in this case, the doctor, given the circumstances, has a particular resonance for our situation today, which is to say, here we are on the University of Chicago campus, and lo and behold, our doctor seems astonishingly familiar to any of you who have attended a faculty meeting or seen a faculty meeting on film. Unlike, let's say, David Mamet and his account of the dynamics in his play Oleana, faculty-student amorous adventures, although, of course, they're not legal, are presented here to us in their due kind of comedic and somewhat disquieting form. And it's that play, it seems to me, between comedy on the one hand and disquiet on the other, that marks pantomime from the outset. I think it's notable, especially, again, given our context, the context that is of the Humanities Festival, that at its origins, opera buffa's initial patrons are lawyers and enlightened aristocrats, which is to say, the form of opera, which has as its function to speak, or in this case, sing the truth to power, which is to say, to lampoon the structures of power in the context of a carnivalesque inversion that Martha alerted us to, that structure is actually solicited and supported by the very people who are being lampooned. Right? So it's as if the Fox network would be sponsoring a critique of mass culture like The Simpsons, which pokes fun at precisely something like the Fox network, which would, in its other guise, namely in the sense of Fox News, be propagating the ideology that is being lampooned. Right? It's that structure, I think, and in particular then the nimbleness of that structure, which enables opera buffa, which animates opera buffa, but in particular which informs the pantomimic form, which then, when transported from one center to another, can adopt to the particularities of that center. Now, improvisation is key to pantomime, as it is then subsequently key in various idioms to opera buffa. And it's that conjunction of improvisation, transparency, that is figurative transparency in the particular embodiments that we saw here, and laughter that seemed particularly propitious to us as we thought about this conjunction of opera and laughter.